Now, why is Django not able to find our images? Why does this URL not work? Because by default, Django locks down all your folders and does not expose them to your browser for security reasons. So all those folders are locked. They are not accessible from outside the server. The static files, like CSS files, are exposed by Django, but these are exceptions. In general, nothing is accessible. I also wouldn't be able to try to access any of the Python files here through the browser. But because of that, our uploaded files are also not accessible by default. Now, to make that work, we should do two things. First, let's go to our main project folder and there to settings. And then at the bottom, besides adding media root, also add a media URL, and then add 2 slashes and in between any path of your choice, like for example, user_media or user-media. Now that's up to you, but that will be part of the URL which will be exposed to the outside world for accessing your uploaded files. Because we won't navigate through the actual file system here, instead we'll construct a URL that leads to those uploaded files. And here you can define how that URL should start, basically, how that should look like. Django automatically does something similar for static files. These files, like our CSS files, are served from our domain /static/ and then the path to our static file. Now we're going to do something similar for user uploaded files. So this is step number 1, but that's not all, because this alone doesn't expose anything. Instead, we should go to the urls.py file. And here I'm going to the one in the app folder. Actually, we need the global, the main urls.py file in our entire project. I'll move the code over there in just a second. I started editing the wrong one here. But we need to edit the urls.py file, the main project urls.py file to be precise. And here on the URL patterns, you should add something with a plus thereafter and call a static function, which is provided by Django. For this, from django.conf.urls.static, you should import static. That's a helper function which serves static files. As I said, Django is automatically configured to serve CSS files in development and static images you might have in your static folder. But for data stored in other files, like our user uploads here, we have to manually make Django aware of those folders which should be exposed to the outside world. Now, static wants 2 arguments. It wants to know the URL, which should be used for exposing the files, and then the path on the file system that holds the actual files. Now for the URL, we want to use that media URL we exposed in our setting, or we configured in our settings. And we can get convenient access to that by importing django.conf, and from there importing the settings. And then we can add settings.media URL. We can access this here to get access to that media URL we defined. And then the other argument we should define here is the document_root argument. This now wants a path to the folder that contains the files that should be exposed. And that's our settings.media root. Because, just to make this clear, media root is the path on the file system where the files are physically stored. Media URL then is the URL we want to show to the outside world from which these files can be loaded. And the mapping between URL and the actual path on our file system is done by this static function which we're calling here. And with that, we're exposing all the files stored in our media root, so in our uploads folder, through that media URL to the outside world. And Django will automatically pick up the media URL and add it to that URL we can access on every image. So with all those changes made, I'm almost there, but I just realized I did this in the wrong URLs.py file. You should not do this in the app-specific URLs.py file. Instead, cut it from there and go to your main project URLs.py file and add plus static and so on there. And then also add the imports there. So the imports from Django conf and Django conf URLs static, remove them from the app-specific URLs.py file and instead add them to your project level URLs.py file. Because it's this main entry point for all the requests where you need to enable this static serving of your user uploaded data. And with that made, with that project level URLs.py file edited, if I now reload profiles list, those images are being displayed here. So now that is working. And now we could, of course, tweak that template however we want. And this is now how we can serve uploaded files. It takes a couple of steps for security reasons, but in the end, it's just about tweaking that URLs.py file, about setting these settings here, and about then accessing the URL on the uploaded file in the template as we're doing it here. Now, of course, we're also going to see that again in action once we apply what we learned to our blog project.